Hello and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Today we will be looking at the merchant's son, Raphael. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned, so if that's a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, wherever relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. Raphael starts in the Golden Deer house, meaning that if they are your choice, he is available from the beginning of the game. If you choose the Black Eagles or the Blue Lions, he will need to be recruited. As with most students, this can be done by obtaining a B support with him, where he can then ask to join your house on any of the following days. Alternatively, Raphael's recruit requirements are in strength and heavy armor. The latter of these is problematic to train on by Leth, since there are only two members of staff who tutor this, Alois and Gilbert, and the latter of these does not appear until Chapter 5, where Alois is then absent, meaning the earliest opportunity you have to train this more than once per exploration is Chapter 6. Furthermore, heavy armor can only be raised in battle if you are in a class that utilizes it, such as Armor Knight, meaning it's awkward to train in that way and can't be done before level 10. Because of this, if you plan on recruiting Raph, I would just go for the support ranks to do it. I like Raphael. I am saying this now because before we talk about the good, we have to get through the bad. Raphael's personal ability is Goodie Basket. This is a percent chance equivalent to Raphael's current luck stat to heal him for 10% of his maximum HP at the start of each turn. No need to be polite about this one, it is at best awful and at worst actively harmful to Raphael's builds. Assuming you actually want the heal, let's look at the math behind this. At base, this means Raphael has a 6% chance to heal 3 HP on any given turn. So roughly once every 17 turns, he will heal for slightly less than 1/3 of a vulnerary. I am going to assume no explanation is needed as to why that is not particularly valuable or useful. But does this scale up? Is it better in the late game? Well, no. At the very late game, in the last couple of maps, this ability will be at its peak, with the highest percent chance to activate due to Raphael's luck being as high as it can go, and healing the most health it can since Raphael's maximum health will be at its largest. If we put Raphael through standard class pathing, on average by level 40, again right at the end of the game, he will have around 21 luck and around 70 HP with no external modifiers or boosts. A 21% chance, so roughly once every 5 turns, Raphael will heal 7 HP at the very end of the game. At this point of the game, that is an extremely negligible amount of HP, and the chance to activate is still very unreliable. It's better, obviously, once every 5 turns is better than once every 17, but it's still not something you can bank on. Perhaps the saddest part about this is that if we took those average endgame effects, that 21% chance to heal 7, and gave it to Raphael at level 1, when that should have the most effect relative to the game at the time, it would still be bad. Very few members of the cast would swap out their personal abilities for this. However, it doesn't end here. So far, this is just an infrequent, very negligible, but otherwise positive effect. That is until we look at its impact on low health builds. There are a few abilities in the game which require a unit to be below a specific health threshold, typically 50%, in order to activate very powerful effects. Because Goodie Basket is completely out of the player's control, there is no way to prevent it from healing Raphael over this threshold and therefore deactivating those abilities. Whilst this doesn't lock Raphael out of using those builds, it does mean you have to take the low but ever-present chance of Goodie Basket's activation into account and plan accordingly, all for an ability that at its absolute best is still extremely lackluster. We will touch a bit more on the potential of low health builds when we talk about Raphael's endgame options. All in all, Goodie Basket is just terrible. It's the perfect storm of being too unreliable and too irrelevant to have it be an effective asset which you can utilize fully, whilst also being completely uncontrollable by the player, meaning you can't play around it not happening either. So with that out of the way, Raphael does not have any crests, meaning that if he uses any relic weapons or equipment, he will take 10 damage per use. It also means he does not get the benefits which crests can provide, however this is not a big deal as they rarely have a large impact anyway. It should be noted that you could potentially use the damaging effects of crests to counteract the effect of Goodie Basket if you wanted to, since that 10 damage would always compensate for the heals Goodie Basket provides. Taking a look at Raphael's skills, he has strengths in axes, brawling, and heavy armor, and weaknesses in bows, reason, and riding. All in all, I like this skill setup. I think it leaves Raphael in quite an advantageous position. It gives him a clear path to some strong endgame options whilst not hitting him too hard in any key areas. Whilst boons in places such as authority or flying would have been appreciated, they are by no means necessary. That being said, a bow weakness is always slightly problematic since most units will want to look for an archer certification at some point, but the starting D rank in heavy armor is always nice since it is the qualifying rank for Armor Knight at level 10 and also puts you closer to some useful abilities. We will go more into detail on this when we discuss his use cases, but I think as an overall, it's fair to say Raphael's skills are on the positive side of the spectrum. Moving on to his stats, it is very much an area of positives and negatives. Raphael's HP base of 30 is the highest in the game, tied with Dedu and a couple of faculty members, with his growth rate being on top on its own, albeit by a very small margin. Complementing this nicely is a very respectable base defense of 7, again coupled with a reasonable growth rate. This leads to Raphael having a decent amount of bulk, a trait which is reasonably uncommon amongst Three Houses units, particularly the students. His base strength of 11 is also very solid and higher than most units early on, although there are some exceptions. This still allows him to hit pretty hard from the get-go. So from what we've seen as of yet, we have a unit who is pretty bulky and capable of outputting some nice damage. So far, so good. Then things start to go very south. Raphael has a base resistance of 1. Yep, 1. That means that mages will be a constant threat to him. The charm base of 4 also leaves him quite susceptible to gambits, and whilst they won't do too much damage, they will have a good chance of landing and rattling him. However, the biggest problem is absolutely Raphael's speed. A base of 6 is shockingly bad, and at a growth rate of 15%, it is not likely to get much better. Whilst Raphael's stats definitely have their positives, they have their negatives too, and they really don't pull any punches on the weaker areas, hitting them very hard. So how does all of this translate to Raphael's performances on the battlefield? Well, it's fair to say that Raphael does not have the easiest time in the early game. From the get-go, his speed is essentially non-existent. The enemies on Chapter 2 mostly have 9 to 10 attack speed. With a base speed of 6, this means that some of them will double Raph even if he is using training gauntlets, and almost all of them will if he's using literally anything else. This results in him being a deceptively fragile unit early on, since those high HP and defense stats matter a lot less if you are having to eat 2 attacks from every enemy. Furthermore, Raphael does not have any defensive enhancements at this point in the game, which is a perk granted to other frontline walls such as Dedu or Balthus. I personally tend to just accept the fact he is going to get doubled, whack the heaviest shield on him that I have available to minimize some of the damage, and deck him out with steel weapons. He still isn't stellar by any means at this point, but it allows him to output maximum damage and secure kills set up by your other units. One tool that can help Raphael early on comes from his authority skill at a D rank, and that is Rally Strength, which raises the attack of an adjacent ally by 4 for the remainder of the turn. This can allow Raphael to fulfill a useful utility role in the early game, especially with strength being one of the better rallies. However, this does come at the cost of him gaining no XP for the action, so be sure to use it cautiously if you wish to keep Raphael around for the long term. I wouldn't usually go into this much depth on a unit's first few levels, but with Raphael's performance being so far removed from what the expectations would be for most people, I felt it warranted a little more elaboration. At level 5, Raphael will want to certify into Fighter. This doesn't require any investment due to his base brawling rank, so this will be guaranteed regardless of what you do. For the early levels, I would prioritize raising Raphael's axes. No matter what path you decide to take him down, you are almost certainly going to utilize these further down the line. Once you reach level 10, there are some certification options that may be desirable due to the class's base stats. In case you are unfamiliar, all classes have base stats. If a unit is below these values without factoring any temporary bonuses when they certify for the class, their stats will be permanently raised to those values. These persist even if the unit is not in the class, so it can be a good way to bolster struggling areas. The first of these is Armor Knight. This requires a C in axes and a D in heavy armor to certify for. Since axes are already beneficial to raise and the heavy armor check is met by default, this is an obvious consideration. Armor Knight has a base defense stat of 12. Raphael is one of the few units who may have already actually attained this by level 10, however it is still more likely that this is not the case, so classing into this is often a free way to get an extra point or 2 of defense, since it doesn't require any investment outside of what you will already be training anyway. The other one of these is a bit more off of the beaten track and may not be considered by a lot of players, and that is a promotion into Thief. The Thief class requires a C sword rank to guarantee a certification, however it can be gambled at D+. Raphael has neither a boon or a bane in this area, so whilst it will require a little investment, the requirement is so low that it is easily attainable without missing out on anything else, especially if you are happy to do that dice roll. The main reason to do this is that the class has a base speed of 11. The dexterity is also at 11 and will probably be boosted, but the speed is what we are really after here. At level 10, when this class becomes available, Raphael will most likely have a speed of around 7, maybe 8 if you're quite lucky, but either way, the odds of Raphael having 11 speed by this point are essentially non-existent. In fact, it is highly unlikely that Raphael will even reach 10 speed before his promotion to an advanced class at level 20, meaning this has a very prominent increase. However, unlike a lot of other stats, speed is very much a game of thresholds. This speed value would need to prevent Raphael from being doubled a reasonable amount or in important places for it to be worth the investment. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if he has 11 speed or 7, the outcome is the same, he gets doubled. So the question is, are there any points in the game where this stat raise is useful? Well, I would say that yes, there are. Chapter 5, providing that level 10 is reached in time, and Chapter 6 see Raphael able to take advantage of this, since the enemies actually get a lot slower due to their transition to steel weaponry, and the 11 base speed can allow Raph to utilise better weapons against them without being doubled in return, such as steel gauntlets or iron axes. However, there is one map where I think this benefit is maximised, and that place is Chapter 8. This chapter is filled with enemies called rampaging villagers, who make up the majority of the opposition's fighting force, with 14 of them starting on the map and then continuing to spawn in pairs every 3 turns until the map is cleared. Once the math is done, taking into account their speed, weapon weight, and strength, these enemies have an effective 14 attack speed, meaning that if Raphael equips a weapon which does not cost him any speed, which at this point would likely be iron gauntlets, he can take them on without the risk of being doubled in return. It is also worth noting that if, between the time of certifying and the time of this chapter, Raphael gains another point of speed to take him up to 12, he could utilise an iron sword or steel gauntlets with the same benefits. The Thief certification can also be used to great effect with the Weight -3 ability, which can be obtained from the Heavy Armour skill at a C rank. On its own, this ability doesn't offer too much, since Raphael's speed is too low to benefit from the reduced weight, but in conjunction with the base speed provided by Thief, this can allow Raphael much more optimal weapon choice, or allow him to equip shields with much less of a deficit, with iron shields now being essentially weightless. With both Weight -3 and the Thief bases, Raphael will likely be able to equip iron axes without losing any speed at this point, allowing him a lot more weapon variety without the risk of getting doubled by a lot of enemies. Now, it is entirely reasonable if you still don't think this investment is worth it, however I do think it is worth bearing in mind and is something a lot of players may not have considered, since when you are thinking of classes Raphael can take advantage of, Thief is probably not the top of any list by default, and even if you don't choose to go for it, it is definitely an option you benefit from being aware of. Personally, this is something that I like to do, since I feel it makes Raph a unit who is much more capable of standing on his own 2 feet, and is not as reliant on help from other units, or from having to play around his shortcomings frequently. It is worth taking into account that with both Thief and Armor Knight, these are not classes we actually want to use at this point in the game, they are just to certify for to get the base stat boosts. In terms of the classes that Raphael will actually want to use at this point in the game, Brigand is top of the list. It is a very easy certification for Raphael, since all it requires is a C in axes to guarantee it. The main draw of Brigand is its mastery ability, Death Blow. This adds 6 might to every attack where the user initiates combat. Death Blow is always a powerful ability, but on units who can make good use of gauntlets, the guarantee to double on player phase means its benefits will be applied twice, making it even more enticing. The other intermediate class which Raphael will want to look at mastering is Archer, requiring C bows. However, due to Raphael's Bane in this area, a gamble on D+ can be the more appealing option. Once again, the big draw here is its mastery ability, in this case hit plus 20. This, shockingly, increases the hit of all attacks by 20. Whilst this is a little out of the way to get, the benefits are more than worth it and I would highly advise picking it up. I would still do Brigand first, however, since the time spent here can be used to get the bow rank up to the desired level. When we start to look at advanced classes, it becomes a lot more variable based on how you want to take Raphael into the endgame. One thing that is worth considering is that the Fortress Knight class, available at level 20 with a B axe and B heavy armor requirement, has a base defense of 17. This can be worth consideration if Raphael is below this mark, just to bump him up. However, the investment required in a skill which is otherwise not particularly useful can be off-putting. Once again, I wouldn't actually use this class in combat. Its 4 move is far too big of a drawback before even considering other factors. Just certifying into it to nudge up Wrath's defense is the core benefit here. Now, if your intent is to use Raphael as a player phase killing machine, my personal choice for this is to utilize the Grappler class. This is an advanced class requiring A brawling, which comes with 2 very strong tools. First of all, Fist Fair, granting +5 damage to all hits with gauntlets. With gauntlets being guaranteed to strike twice on the player phase, this is obviously very nice to have, since this is a very appreciated damage boost. More importantly, however, is the class's mastery combat art, Fierce Iron Fist. This is exclusive to the class, meaning even after unlocking it, you can only utilize it in Grappler. However, the effects make this still very worth it. Fierce Iron Fist is a brawling combat art that allows the user to always strike 3 times in succession, allowing for extremely reliable high damage output. Furthermore, this raises the use of some of the previously discussed abilities. Death Blow and Fist Fair now trigger 3 times instead of 2, and before anything else is factored in, these will add an extra 33 damage to each player phase combat. That being said, Grappler does have some downsides. It doesn't really offer much outside of just running up to units and pressing Fierce Iron Fist. Whilst effective, it is very one-dimensional. This is why, even if you intend to stay in Grappler, you may want to consider temporarily dipping into one of Raphael's other late game options in order to pick up a very useful skill. That skill is Quick Riposte, and this is earned by mastering the War Master class. Quick Riposte guarantees that the user will double and guarantees that the enemy won't when they are attacked on the enemy phase with more than 50% health. With Raphael's massive health pool and struggling speed, it's clear to see why this is incredibly desirable. It is very easy to keep it active and eliminates one of his key weaknesses. War Master requires A brawling and A axes to guarantee qualification, and being a master class, 200 class EXP is required to earn the skill. So it certainly isn't free. However, even if you don't plan on using War Master as your endgame class, which I will get more into shortly, it is still an extremely potent class whilst you are in it. If you intend to go back to Grappler and utilize Fierce Iron Fist, this skill is still extremely beneficial. Despite gauntlets being a little underwhelming on the enemy phase due to their low might and brave effect not being present, the easy trigger to guarantee that you won't get doubled can bolster Raphael's survivability significantly, allowing you to be much more aggressive with the plays that you make. Another tool you can use here to help Raphael's sustainability is Brawl Avoid +20. When using gauntlets, this will give Raphael an additional 20 avoid, and is a skill obtained from mastering the War Monk class, which requires B+ brawling and C+ faith to pick up. The brawling rank is obviously not an issue, but the faith rank is out of the way, so you may want to go a little lower and gamble the certification. This ability will not make Raphael a reliable dodge tank, but it will let him avoid some damage from time to time, which is always a nice bonus to have. I find it a bit out of the way to get in a lot of cases, especially if picking up Quick Riposte too, since this requires mastering 2 additional high investment classes. However, if you tend to do more auxiliary battles or wipe out more opponents on a map, this may be more attainable. The Grappler build of Raphael is the only one where I would properly consider taking Brawl Avoid. It can be used in others too, but for those I would prefer to predominantly make use of axes over gauntlets, which significantly reduces its usefulness. Plus, there is greater competition for ability slots, and considering its investment already makes it a questionable pickup for me, this rules it out if I'm not going Grappler. Now, Raphael also has some options as an enemy phase unit. We previously discussed the viability of low health builds on him when looking at Goodie Basket. One such build makes use of 2 skills here, Vantage and Wrath. Vantage is obtained from mastering the intermediate class Mercenary, which requires a C rank in swords to guarantee certification. It should be noted that if you choose to do this early, this obviously makes the Thief choice a no-brainer since you will already have the requirement. Vantage guarantees a unit will attack first if they are below 50% HP. Wrath is obtained from mastering the Warrior class, which is available at level 20 with an A-Axe requirement. This increases the unit's crit rate by 50 when their health is below half. Now this combination is extremely strong, and for Raphael it is not too far out of the way, however it does have its issues. Firstly, we have already discussed how Goodie Basket can be problematic as it can heal Raphael out of the range of these abilities. Secondly, with Quick Riposte requiring over 50% HP and Wrath Vantage requiring under, these abilities obviously cannot be used in conjunction, meaning that if, for example, Raphael misses his attack, he is likely to be doubled whilst on low HP. I still think there is merit to this build, however there is an enemy phase option I do much prefer. My optimal enemy phase Raphael makes use of a skill in his authority tree, which is Battalion Wrath. This is similar to the regular variant of Wrath, except instead of an HP check, it is instead based on battalion endurance, which must be below 1/3. Now with battalion Wrath, you obviously do not get the luxury of attacking first, since Vantage is not in play. To compensate for this, Raphael can be made into a protection tank to minimize damage. This basically involves stacking as much defense onto Raphael as possible through the use of shields, battalions, class bases, and his already high defense growths. With this, Raphael can reach a protection of around 35 to 40 in the late game, more than enough to shrug off the hardest physical hits he will see, including endgame War Masters, Wyvern Lords, Warriors, and even bosses, before things like temporary boosts or stat boosters are taken into consideration. It's not like this is a late spike either, the path leading up to this sees him facing little threat from most physical units. That being said, it is worth bearing in mind that mages will still deal hefty damage to him, so you may want to prioritize eliminating these on the player phase or with other units. Despite this, Raphael will still eat up some damage. One tool that can be helpful is the Combat Art Healing Focus. This is obtained at B Brawling and restores 50% of the user's HP. It can be used with any weapon equipped, so can be very helpful for keeping HP topped up whilst advancing for the next enemy phase. The goal with this build is to have Raphael tank the first attack and then strike back with an extremely high damage guaranteed crit to kill off any opponents he may face. The big benefit of going for this option is that Raphael can be at full HP when using this setup, which offers quite a lot over the regular Wrath. It requires no setup, being active as soon as the map starts. It offers a lot of safety. If something goes wrong, Raphael's massive HP pool can take the hit. You have freedom from Goodie Basket heals ruining your build, and when they do trigger, they are a positive albeit small help. Quick Riposte can be utilised, preventing the enemy from doubling in the event of something like a missed attack. A drawback of this variant is that you will need to make sure you can keep your battalions on that 1/3 or below checkpoint, since the Battalion Wrath ability does not trigger if your battalion is broken and they can only be repaired to full endurance. To assist with this, your other units can set up battalions ready for if Raphael's does break by getting their endurance low during their own combats. You can also make use of a relatively underappreciated B rank authority skill, Defensive Tactics, which halves the damage battalions take. This can lead to an endgame skill setup of Death Blow, Hit plus 20, Battalion Wrath, Quick Riposte, and Defensive Tactics, with the latter of those able to be swapped out for something like Axe Prowess or Weight -3 if you feel it would be beneficial to do so. Now with either of these Wrath-oriented builds, you are going to want to load Raphael with crit. This can be done via battalion boosts, a crit ring, abilities, and killer weaponry. You are also going to want to utilise axes as your primary weapon, since they are much more effective on the enemy phase than gauntlets. There are also gambits that can be used by other units onto Raphael to make him a lot stronger with these builds, the primary one being Retribution, which allows the units affected by it to counterattack from any range for 5 turns, making dealing with ranged opponents far easier. There are 2 classes which I would consider optimal for these setups, War Master and Wyvern Lord. Starting off with War Master, this is significantly easier for Raphael to certify into, with both of its A rank stats being boon areas that will have been made use of throughout the game. It also has innate crit plus 20 built into the class, which is obviously very helpful for Wrath setups. War Master is also ground-based, allowing access to far more battalion options, which is very beneficial when Raphael lacks an authority boon. On the other hand, it is only a 6-move class and lacks flight or canto. Wyvern Lord, alternatively, is much more of an investment for Raphael, since both flying and lances, previously untouched skills, will need to be raised, with the former needing to go all the way up to A rank and the latter up to C, with no boon in either area. For this, Wyvern Lord offers slightly better class modifiers, with more defense and speed being given, as well as flight, canto, and 8 move. However, it does not get crit plus 20 as War Master does. It also has Wyvern Rider as a level 20 midpoint into the advanced class, which can help Raphael raise his flying ranks. Personally, I favour the War Master build. The investment required for Wyvern Lord is just too high for me to justify. If this were New Game Plus and we didn't have to worry about raising the skills or raising authority for Raphael to gain access to some of the better flying battalions, this opinion might change, but for me the ends do not justify the costs. Just to break it down, for Wyvern Lord, you will want an A in axes, flying, and potentially brawling for quick riposte, potentially a B in both heavy armor and authority, and a C in bows, swords, and lancers. In contrast, even at its most costly, War Master wants an A in axes and brawling, a B in heavy armor and authority, and a C in bows and swords. Removing flying from the equation makes it so much more attainable, as everything else that is a B rank or higher is one of Raphael's strengths. with the exception of Authority, which is a highly valued skill regardless. I realized that there was a lot of options, changes, and information there, so just as a quick summary, my personal preference is a protection tank focus build in the War Master class making use of Battalion Wrath. However, this is also viable in Wyvern Lord, or both classes can be considered for Wrath Vantage setups. Alternatively, Grappler can be used to facilitate a strong player phase build. Overall, Raphael is certainly a unit of peaks and troughs, who really suffers from a poor early game but ramps up significantly as the game goes on, developing into a unit with more options and power than I think people realise, with a lot of potential to bring things to your team that are not all too common. Through my own shortcomings, he is a unit who I have previously underrated quite heavily, due to his weak early performances souring my opinion of him and trying to shoehorn him into traditionally stronger builds, rather than working with his own tools and strengths and finding ways to compensate for his weaknesses. Hopefully this can help prevent you from doing the same and helps you get what you want out of Raphael while maximising his usefulness should you wish to use him as a part of your roster. If you have any suggestions or requests for who you want me to do next, feel free to ask in the comments below. Thanks for watching.